Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. And Knox, welcome to Texas from
Glad to be here.
Mississippi.
Trying not to mess with Texas.
You know, as we look back, I mean, Michael Sussman's comments, it could not have been better placed. He talked about a regional approach, a multi-state approach. When we first showcased this I-20 corridor to this august body in 2007, it was determined that if we brought together the two states, the three states, that we would have that much more clout when it came to dealing with congressional funding. Well, in 2007, we actually had North Central Texas Council of Governments, followed by the East Texas Council of Governments, followed by the Northwest Louisiana Council of Governments, and followed by the Ouachita Council of Governments. That's over 44 entities stretching from Fort Worth to Vicksburg that endorsed this approach. Now, as students of economics, you can look back and you can say, well, what happened? Why are we still here 15 years later? Well, there was something called the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. You might remember that. And then in 2018, we had another recession. Then we had some hostile governors, and then a hostile administration. So, but we persevered throughout all this. And thank you for enduring with us. Because when we started, I had very little gray hair. Carl had a full head of black hair. So it's amazing what can happen in 15 years. But here we are. Now, and looking at, I want to share with you just this, that, you know, to paraphrase on an old adage here, with $3, you know, and a good idea, you can get you a cup of Starbucks coffee. It used
Before inflation, Judge.
that used to be 50 cents, Knox. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, you have a dream, and this dream can become a vision when you share it with other people. When they're persuaded to follow you, and you develop a consensus as to what we need to do going forward. That's what makes a vision a reality. And that's where we are today, because the perseverance will go through this slide with you. But the IIJA that you've already heard about, $16 billion for long distance rail, that's what makes this so timely. And the fact that we've been building toward this for over 10 years. So, I'm going to follow this, and I want you, this is my wife, Christina. Here, she is a writer, a visual artist, and she has prepared this. And she pointed out to me that the logo is a route. These have been passed off on some of the tables, and you can see the route that we're talking about from Fort Worth to Atlanta. So here's your route, extending from Fort Worth, and we have just recently obtained resolutions from the Regional Transportation Committee, which represents 44 entities from DFW Airport to Fort Worth, Dallas, McKinney, Grand Prairie, Mesquite, all the way over to Mineola, Longview, Marshall, Caddo Parish, which is Shreveport, Bossier Parish, Bossier City, Grambling, Ruston, Monroe, and Knox will tell you about, they've been able within the last couple of months to get resolutions from Vicksburg to Jackson to Meridian. So that's developing. It's been developing since 2007, and we've gone back and we've resurrected some of these resolutions to freshen them up so that when we talk to our elected officials, they'll know that this is not something that's stale, you know, it's live and it's in action. Now, by connecting the dots, you'll note There's about a 340-mile stretch in here in which there's existing track, which is currently owned by UP and KCS. And that is there's existing right-of-way, existing track. KCS has refused to really talk with us for over the years. But now a new era is dawning because we got Canadian Pacific, which has got an excellent reputation for being passenger friendly. And Canadian Pacific has entered into an agreement with Amtrak, effective December of 17th, just this past year. And it says that they will take and refresh the study of this route, and within 2 years will come to an agreement with respect to at least one frequency, if not two frequencies a day. So it has gone past the talking stage. It is now into a stage of documentation between Amtrak and Canadian Pacific. So what brings these to a confluence? Okay, well, the strong grassroots multi-state coalition of support built over and sustained over these many years, as I mentioned to you about the resolutions, again, from Fort Worth over now to Meridian, Mississippi. The feasibility and capacity study, which we completed in 2015 and 2017, those showed that Amtrak makes money on this route. There's no reason for a state-supported train because it's more than 750 miles. So it's profitable to Amtrak. That's the good news. The better news is, from a capacity standpoint, we've had Texas Transportation Institute, their counterpart in New Orleans, and the counterpart in Mississippi, all conduct studies to say, what would it take to be able to implement passenger rail where you didn't interfere or impede freight traffic? And he said it would take $80 million. That could have gone to 100 by now, but it's $100 million to construct siding along the way so that you would not be interfering with freight traffic. And that was important to us. And again, $16 billion for regional rail and $100 million. There's about 6 zeros to the right of the decimal when it comes to what percentage that takes. It's less than 1/10,000th of 1%. So it's not a big investment for what we'd be getting, because you'll be getting another transportation link here. So the passengers of the IIJA, as we've already heard, $66 billion for rail and $16 billion for long distance. And then lastly, the merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City is currently underway, and that should be completed either later this year or the first part of next. Our partners. Our Corridor Council, East Texas Corridor Council, Regional Transportation Council, Southern Rail Commission, again down on the lower left, Tempo, North Central Texas Council of Governments, North Delta, and the Coordinated Development Corporation. All of these entities, together with the National Association of Railroad Passengers, have joined together to endorse this route. And again, we're welcoming Mississippi into it, and then hopefully we'll be able to encourage representation from Alabama as well. We had hoped to hear earlier from Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. It's Texas 30. She has been instrumental in the progress that we have made. I had the honor of serving with her in the Texas Senate before she went to the House, the U.S. House. And since September, we've had one Zoom meeting between she and Christina and I and Steve Gardner, the president of Amtrak, and he told us that this was a priority route to Amtrak. So we're encouraged from that, and we'll be looking at working with him Also Senator Roger Wicker, whom I know that Knox has been working with, and Louisiana Secretary of Transportation, Sean Wilson, as well as Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards. Again, so it's been many years. It's been a parallel strategy, reaching out and working to our colleagues to the east and west to build and sustain a long-distance passenger rail connection through this multi-state coalition. And we'll continue to work on that because it's an economically viable alternative. And the fact of the matter is, the recent estimate on what a mile of interstate highway cost in Virginia on I-95, it was over $45 million a mile. Over $45 million a mile. And there's no plans to expand the capacity of Interstate 20 at this point. The only expansions have been done in the metro areas, but on the long routes, it's 2 lanes of traffic. 2 lanes east, 2 lanes west. I'll just share this for your consideration. In 1960, about 5 years before the interstate highway was committed, what was the population of Texas? Anyone want to venture a guess? 9 million. 9 million. 60 years later, the population of Texas, 29 million. It's tripled. And how much capacity have we seen increase on Interstate 20? 0. You can't plan that way. You know, it can take 3 hours to get to DFW from Marshall, Texas now. If something's not done, that number could go to 4 or 5 in 20 years. Because you can't keep putting more cars on the road and then hoping to expand the capacity. We've seen that on I-35. You've driven that, how many? Yeah. And for the people that have driven it, you know, you either smile or you're smirking or you're saying, you know, oh my God, I remember the last time we did it was on February 23rd, coming back in the ice storm from Austin. And it was no fun, I will assure you. But that extra lane that's been added, that's already outdated. So I think Einstein was the one that suggested, you know, stupidity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, a dear friend, she was responsible for getting us almost $740,000, with which we did the determination of the 2015 feasibility study, which shows no annual operating expense, and the capacity study, which again I mentioned $80 million. So thank you, Senator Kay Bailey. We appreciate that. And Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. Unfortunately, she's announced her resignation, but we're understanding that Colin Allred will be taking up this role that Eddie B. has taken with respect to our project. Again, when we had our conference call, Mr. Gardner requested, okay, can you possibly talk with Oberman, with Surface Transportation, and see if they can strongly suggest, that Canadian Pacific could have a favorable consideration by the STB if Canadian Pacific is speaking with Amtrak about developing passenger rail. Congresswoman Johnson sent that letter. And within 3 months, we had the agreement between Amtrak and CP with respect to this route. Coincidence? Probably not. And Southern Rail Commission. On your left is John Spain. Just to his left is Knox Ross, who's on the stage with me. They passed a resolution in 2014 supporting this route. And we are very much appreciative of that. And then on February 23rd of this year, Knox came up and spoke with a group in Bossier City, speaking that they would be now assisting us in coming together and bringing forces together for the northern route. They had previously been working on the New Orleans to Jacksonville, Florida route, but that's come to a little pause, which he can get into. But they're now going to be assisting us with that, and again, we do appreciate that effort. With respect to this end of the presentation, again, I hope you found it informative. I'll now yield the floor to the distinguished chairman of the Southern Rail Commission, and I suppose we'll have questions at the end of the presentation, Peter? Yeah, do it then? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Knox?
Thank you.
It's the big button.
All right, I don't need it. Given the quirky nature of PowerPoint, unfortunately, I don't have one. So to do that. As I've been introduced, I'm Knox Ross. I'm the chairman of the Southern Rail Commission. The Southern Rail Commission is a compact. It's a compact created by an act of Congress back in 1982. And it consists of the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. We have 6 commissioners from each state. We're all appointed by our governors. We're uncompensated for our time, and we promote passenger rail, and we work with some freight rail in our 3 states. We work very closely with the Federal Railroad Administration. I have a lot of friends here, past and present, that we've worked with. We work closely with Amtrak, and we also work closely with the DOTs in our 3 states to push forward passenger rail projects. We're a unique operation, and you notice that in a couple of presentations today, they talked about one of the IIJA rail title provisions that talks about state rail compacts. And one of those is something we really promoted in that bill, is trying to get federal funding to match state funding for compacts such as ours, who are able to work across state lines, work with all of our partners, and make passenger rail operations, because in most places we're going to work across state lines. In Texas is big enough, you can do stuff in Texas. Mississippi, it's not big enough to do stuff anywhere. Because if you're going to go anywhere, you got to go out of the state. If you go to Memphis, you got to go to Tennessee. You go to New Orleans, you got to go to Louisiana. You go to Birmingham, you got to go to Alabama. If you want to come to Dallas, I got to go through Louisiana. There's just nowhere in Mississippi to go. So it's very important for us in many states to be able to coordinate with other states. So we're able to do that. We're able to apply for CRISI grants. We're able to apply for all the grants that the federal government has allowed, and it makes us, I think, very effective in being able to push forward projects. The Southern Rail Commission now is working on 3 separate projects. As we've discussed earlier, we're working on the Mobile, New Orleans project, which many of you are familiar with because it's going before the STB next week. That has been a very interesting project. We have been working on that for 6 or 7 years. We've run through, I think we were discussing this morning, I don't think anybody that works for the host railroad now was working for the host railroad when we started. And unfortunately, our relationship hasn't been that great. We really don't like that, because we think that passenger rail and freight rail have to coexist, that we have to make sure this works for both parties, that freight rail is an extremely important part of our economy, and we recognize that and want to support it. But we also believe that moving people around the country is very important. And we're heavily focused, because of our 3 states are rural, we're heavily focused on trying to serve our rural communities as well as our city centers, and connecting our states to the rest of the country. Because one of the other things you saw is that we've got 2 mega regions. Well, our 3 states, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, are right in the middle of 2 mega regions. Where we are today, Dallas-Fort Worth, I don't know what they call them. I know that they're mega regions. You got Dallas-Fort Worth mega region, you got Atlanta mega region. Well, we're right in the middle of it. And we need to be able to connect to those 2 regions. We don't need to be flyover country, or as has been discussed in an earlier presentation, pass-through country. We need to be able to connect to those, extremely important to us. So we're working on Mobile, New Orleans. We're also working on Baton Rouge to New Orleans, which has been a priority of the state of Louisiana. The third project we've been working on is the I-20 corridor between Meridian, Mississippi, and Dallas-Fort Worth, which would split the existing Crescent service at Meridian. A section would go on to New Orleans, as it does now, and another section would come across I-20 to Dallas-Fort Worth. We've been wanting to do that for years. Kansas City Southern, they don't host any passenger service, don't want to host any passenger service. They made that very clear to us. So we've just had to be in a holding pattern for many years. We continue to talk to them. They're not ugly to us. They're just very candid and straightforward, which is fine. Canadian Pacific comes on the scene in the competition between Canadian National and Canadian Pacific. We were able to make some very good relationships with Canadian Pacific and bring some things to the forefront that are very helpful in our cause. Not only Baton Rouge, New Orleans, we also are beginning to look at Baton Rouge to Shreveport and also the I-20 corridor. And we were able to get in writing commitments from Canadian Pacific that if they are successful in merging with Kansas City Southern, they will do certain things, which is historic, really, for us. And I think it's a testament to the work we've done over the years and the ability of the Southern Rail Commission, again, a three-state compact, and it's different than sort of an activist group or a not-for-profit in that it has specific assigned powers and responsibilities that we can go as a group and work with the Federal Railroad Administration. We can work with Amtrak. We are seen as an entity to work with outside or representing our DOTs, I think would be the best way to put it, because they ultimately fund us, that we represent them. And as you all are looking at projects, not only passenger projects, but freight rail projects where you have a bridge, let's say a Mississippi River bridge that spans 2 states. All of a sudden you got 2 state DOTs that have 2 different things. You have an entity like a Southern Rail Commission, you can operate that project through that type of entity. I think it's really important to look at it more than just a passenger rail operation, is that when you have multi-state projects, compacts like the Southern Rail Commission can be extremely effective. So, I've told you about our current projects, what we're working on. We're very excited about those, obviously. We told you a little bit about the commission and how that works. And how does this work through the IIJA? Well, we've got the compact funding matched dollar for dollar what the states put into compacts. I encourage you to look at those. If you have projects that are multi-state, this is a perfect way to do it. And the federal government will match dollar for dollar that. And I think that you'll find that the Federal Railroad Administration will look very kindly on you if you begin to try to organize in this way, because it makes it much easier for them to work with you. The other parts of it that you've seen that we were heavily involved in, the funding not only for Amtrak but also for the Federal Railroad Administration. Basically what that does is it takes a pot of money where maybe you're in this position where Amtrak is maybe focused on the Northeast Corridor. And you're saying they're not doing enough out here where we are, intercity rail, city pair rail. So you can go to the FRA and say, FRA, here's a project we think is meaningful. And we need it looked at, and we need something done about it. And FRA, for the first time, will have the funds to be able to do it. And so I think it's going to open up a lot more projects that are very worthy and that may bring great economic impact to our states through the FRA. Now, they've got to figure out how they're going to do that. They've got a lot of work to do. But I think as they go, they're going to look toward compacts like ours and compacts that you all could form to help them implement those. So I think if you begin to form those compacts, you're going to be a step ahead of everybody else. So I'd encourage you to do that as you move forward. Connect those relationships, make those relationships. Finally, you have to be patient and you have to persevere. We've been doing this. I've been on the Rail Commission probably 12 years, and we've been working on the coast train for 6 or 7. Like I said, the people we started with are gone. But I'm convinced that the only reason we have a shot at this and we have a case before the STB is because we just didn't quit. We just didn't quit. And it goes back to, I was listening to Mr. Sussman about this Nevada Northern project. I've read about this over the years. And basically, you got a bunch of people down there that said, we're not going to give up on it. This may work. We're not going to give up on it. And I see other projects that you talked about. A lot of them are going along like Judge Anderson. We just ain't giving up on it. And you finally wait to the day that you get somebody that comes in and says, we can do it. And I would encourage you on that. But I would definitely encourage you to look at the commission language in the IIJA. Consider forming a commission if you have a multi-state project. Passenger, freight. Either one of those. And use those provisions that are in there to be able to make the projects you have work. Thank you. And we'll take any questions that you might have.